Good morning. How many of you enjoyed Dreamfest last night? That's good. I'm guessing you're running on coffee and sheer determination to be here this early. I'm running on abject terror. I kid. It's abject terror and crippling self-doubt. So, you're here for looking under the hood of your org with Eclipse. I'm excited to share this presentation with you. As an admin who likes to get into a little bit of trouble when I can, this is the perfect tool for doing that. Our forward-looking statements slide. I should not be making any forward-looking statements today, but if I do, please make all of your purchasing decisions on features that are currently available in Salesforce. My name is Jamie Buck-Tomek. I am a business intelligence manager. Sounds like an oxymoron, but it mostly means that we work with Salesforce. I work at a company called Foundation Source. We help private foundations start and manage their foundations, which is a nice way of being in the philanthropic space, but actually being paid well. So let's talk about change. Change is inevitable. How many of you have orgs where if you make a change, no one will know, and if it goes wrong, no one will find out? All right, that was just a baseline test to make sure there's no crazy people here. With most orgs, as they grow and mature, they become more complicated. There are more people that are involved and more people who will be impacted by a change that you make, even if it's a small one. Here's my favorite example. I've done this more than once. I've determined no one uses this field, and this is my process of elimination. I don't recognize it. That's enough. There's no description, help test, or documentation. Obviously, I add a description to every field that I have in Salesforce. So that's clearly an aberration. A report shows it's rarely used. OK, that's reasonable. None of my power users know what it is either. And they've been using Salesforce for at least 2 weeks. So. And like I said, I know my org, so it can't possibly be something that I've forgotten. OK, let's delete it. Well, funny thing, minutes after, you get a call from the head of another department saying that a critical report is no longer working. Oh, so the fact that it was used rarely just means that the records that did have it were really important. What should I have done? Well, obviously checked all of these different areas to see where it was used. That's simple. There's only 20. And I imagine for each one of those, there's not 10 or hundreds of options underneath that you would check manually. And I have a lot of time in my job. I don't know about you. So I could have done this, no problem. I just chose not to. Well, most of us aren't doing this because it's just not practical. And some of the areas we may not be really comfortable with, like, for instance, checking Apex triggers or Apex classes. So can we make this process easier and more reliable? Well, to do that, we would need a tool. We'd want a tool that tells us where something is, no matter where it is in our org. If it's mentioned, if it's even just whispered, we want to know about it. And we want to get a complete list of all of those places and a list that we can actually work from and understand what it's telling us. Well, there is a tool. Not a lot of admins know about it because it was built for developers. Eclipse overall is built for many developers, not just Salesforce developers. It is called an integrated development environment. So you will hear that a lot if you talk about Eclipse. They'll say IDE. You're like, that sounds great. I have no idea what it is. It's really a text editor on steroids. And if you've ever done any programming, you would be familiar with something like this. The way that Eclipse works with Salesforce specifically is that there is a Force.com plugin. And what that does is that allows Eclipse to work with Salesforce, understand how Salesforce is constructed. And it's free, which is even better. So how does it work? Well, Salesforce is built with metadata that describes a lot of how it functions. And what Eclipse is able to do is it is able to download hundreds and hundreds and thousands of files that describe all of the pieces of Salesforce, including reports, objects, dashboards. All of that is brought down in XML files, which are structured text files. And we'll see some examples of those. When it is downloaded onto your machine, it has a structure. It starts with a workspace, which is just a main folder on your machine. And then underneath that, something called projects. Generally, if you're going to be using this from an admin perspective, you'll probably only have one, because you'll have one for your organization. But you could have multiples if you wanted to. Then within that is, again, folders, yay, for the different Salesforce components. And you'll see there's flows, there are labels and layouts. Everything, almost, that you could want is available in this tool. And then you finally get to what we're really interested in, which is the metadata. And that is the files within those various folders. And that's what Eclipse uses. That's what Eclipse will search. That's what Eclipse will let you manipulate. And then you can send those changes back to Salesforce. So I've said metadata a few times. It sounds a lot like data. And theoretically it is, but it's not the way that you would think about it normally when you're dealing with Salesforce. Metadata, it describes how the objects, fields, page layouts, et cetera, how they work. So it's not going to tell you that 10 people ordered blue shirts. It's going to tell you that the field for color is a text field. So here's an example. We have a report. I've only blanked out the numbers because it's like billions of dollars. I didn't want people to get, feel inadequate. But what this is this is a standard report in Lightning. And this report has some filters. And when we look at the metadata, which is this structured text file here, you can actually see those filters are spelled out here in this yellow area. You have the column name, which is stage name, and then it is equals and the different stages that we're actually looking for. So you could open up all of these files and look at that. I don't recommend doing that, but I just want you to get a sense of what is actually in there, and it's pretty valuable. And you can use a tool like Eclipse to search en masse and find this kind of information. Here are some examples of things that you can do. You can search the name of a field. This is what we're going to do today to find out where it's used, including even dashboard footers, which I thought was pretty wild. So then when you're making a change, you will actually know, hey, it's in this report that so-and-so uses all of the time, and you won't get that phone call again. One that recently became really valuable, I'm going to call out my boss briefly, is recovering a deleted version of a flow. Now, some of us, when we launch a flow, we look at all the different versions and we say, let's be neat and tidy, and let's get rid of these old versions. You delete, 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 and then you realize, oh, it was actually starting me at the top again, and I just deleted this thing I spent 4 weeks building. And you call Salesforce support. Totally helpful all the time. Very, I didn't want to burden them with my question. So we kind of had a panic attack for 4 or 5 days, maybe a little longer. And I was actually building out this presentation, and I said, you know what? I'm talking about this tool that works with metadata. Leap of faith that a flow design would be metadata. Well, turns out it is. So every version of the flow that you have is also one of these XML files. And if you download it and you look at the properties, there's a little checkbox that says archived. You can uncheck that. It is no longer archived, and it pops up again. It was a total leap of faith. I would definitely do it a little bit differently next time, because we didn't get quite everything back that we were hoping for, but that's just the power of what you can do with this tool. And one other popular one is moving reports from one report folder to another. Let's see, we're talking about folders. We were just looking at a picture of folders. Turns out you can literally just grab the reports from one folder and then move them to another and push that back up. So lots of different things. But let's take a look at searching. OK, so I've been like really excited about this, but not a lot of people use it. And why? Well, one of the biggest issues, I think, is just installing the tool. Because if you are not comfortable working with Java, there's a lot of acronyms. I'll admit, I looked and I said, they both have J. I assume that's the same thing. It's not. It's definitely not. And then when you get Eclipse, Eclipse has a bunch of different options too. I love that this is flexible, but somebody please just tell me what to select here. And then when you actually have Eclipse installed, you have to go out and get the plugin to work with Salesforce. So it seems daunting, and if you don't have a set of instructions, it's easy to go wrong and get confused and, again, pick one of these 12 different versions of these 12 different options. So if you can find install instructions, and actually Megan Brodkey recently wrote a really great walkthrough, then it's not so bad, and you've really gotten over what I think is one of the biggest humps with using this tool, is just getting it on your machine. So now that we have it on our machine, let's get some of that metadata. Because without the metadata, Eclipse has nothing to look at. Eclipse has nothing to move or let you edit. So the first time that you start using it, you have to download the things that you're interested in searching. So when you open up Eclipse, it's going to ask you, what workspace do you want? And this is what we talked about a minute ago. It's that one folder on your machine that's going to hold all of this stuff. And so you just pick one. If you have multiples, you can also tell it, stop asking me. I only have this one field. And then it opens up, and you have a panic attack. Because like any writer who hates a blank page, you're looking at this, and you're like, where's my stuff? Like, I want to do something. What do I do? Well, once you get some actual metadata, you have a lot of information over here and a lot of things to choose from. And they're named slightly differently than what you might expect. But as you start to look through them and work with them, you'll start to understand which is which. So for instance, you have access to your dashboards. That's pretty straightforward. Flows, that includes Process Builder. Layouts, it's page layouts. Not a big leap, but for me, it took me a second. And what you do when you want to get your metadata is you actually tell it which elements you want. You don't have to download everything. At some point, that may make sense if you have a change that you know is impacting a wide variety of things in Salesforce. But if you just want to look through all reports, you can just download all reports, and that's fine. There are certain things that don't come over, but that's fine. They don't come over in the API either. And it's just letting you know. And what you do is you hit the Add Remove button. And it again warns you just in case. And here you can actually scroll through all of the various items that are available to you, including profiles, report types. And you can, for anything that has a subfolder, so the little triangle over there, if there's only a subset of reports that you want, you can do that too. So, OK. So we've got our metadata. We've got a bunch of files downloaded. This is super exciting. We can't wait. So let's start searching. So we had this scenario at our company, actually. And I don't know if any of you run into this. We had a formula for our run rate revenue. was great until, shockingly, we changed how our run rate revenue is calculated again. And we started thinking, you know what, if we keep doing this, it's going to impact old closed opportunities because it's just a formula and it just keeps updating. So we decided to build out a series of steps to actually workflow it into a different field. So it's basically snapshotted. And then if for some reason we change the pricing and we want it to update on open opportunities, we can do that too. But we'd rather do that by hand than having it do that all the time. The problem is, as you can imagine, run rate revenue is a field that we like to use. It makes us feel good. We made money. So we have it in a lot of reports, and a lot of people see it. So we had to find all of the places that we were using this old field and go in and make adjustments. Whether it's a report, we're going to have to pick the new field. If it's a workflow, we're going to have to, again, pick the new field. So how do we do this? Well, Eclipse actually makes it very easy. What you do is you go up here to search, and you click on File. And then you're basically just matching strings. I generally will look on the actual API name because labels can change, and that's going to get you the exact field that you're looking for, assuming, of course, that you named it consistently. So that one's pretty straightforward. I'm just looking for this. If you find it, great, let me know. You can also tell it, I want to look at everything that I've downloaded. Or if you're somebody who's downloaded everything, and again, this is just a small piece that you want to look at, you can set up these working sets that says, for this type of search, I always just want to look at reports and workflows. And so it'll only search those things. You can also get a little creative. So in our company, really hard to imagine, but people did not name the run rate final field the same over the 14 years that we've had the tool. So we have to get a little creative. And so what we have here is, it's not necessarily a regular expression. These are really wildcards. And what it's saying is, and we can see it better here, OK, I'm looking for run with anything, any particular character after it. So did we do run underscore rate, or did we just run it all together, run rate? And I did the same thing after rate, because again, sometimes we used underscores, sometimes we didn't. And then I did an asterisk, because who knows, somebody did V2. That's always my favorite. I've actually done it, but we won't talk about that. And so once you have that search, the results populate down here. And so what you'll see here is we have a list of all of the areas within what we've downloaded, of course. If you didn't download metadata for something, it's not going to show up in these results. But what you'll see here is there were 257 matches in this workspace. I've done searches where there were over 1,000 uses of something. And then I just put that project away and didn't do it. But obviously, it's not so much even just the number of results that you have here, but what about all of the places that you didn't find it, but you spent time looking? So again, these are pretty straightforward. You've got dashboards. I found it on some layouts. I found it on some reports. I found it on some objects, even classes. So underneath each of these folders is going to be details about all of the results that you actually got. So here's an example. What it is saying in that results window, so we're just zooming in on it, is that on the report, close rate year to date by region, I am using the field run rate final. That's pretty straightforward, makes sense. And so if we go to the report, you'll see, ta-da, we're using run rate final in that report. Now, not really earth-shattering. You could find that out quickly by looking at it. But let's look at this one. OK, so we have field, opportunity run rate final. We just saw that. This is a different report now. But then we have also source column name. Let's see what that means. So first, let's confirm. Yes, run rate final is in this report. Fantastic. But what's this next one, source column name? Well, strangely enough, that is a bucketed field that we are using on that report. And we have actually called it something else, revenue group. So if you were to go to that report and you didn't have the run rate final field displaying anywhere, you wouldn't know that you were using it. You'd have to go and check that report and look at the bucketed field and see, what is this bucketed field made of? And this tells you right here, it's made of run rate final. So that's pretty cool. And you'll see over there that that is the field that we're talking about. Here's some other matches. So we have a match in the Apex code. Now this is something that a developer wrote for us. We didn't write it, probably won't write it. But we need to know and then reach out to our developer and say, hey, we've changed this field. So the thing that you're pulling in, the thing that you're calculating on, we need you to update that. Otherwise, that information would still be using the old field. And it's not something that we, within the Salesforce interface, are really looking at. Then down here below, we have email templates. That's always fun, going through email templates. I'm sure that you have one or two, so it shouldn't be a problem. And you know they're active and people are using them. So this is telling us that there is actually, and you can see the HTML in the email, it's paragraph, and then you're showing, okay, I'm pulling in run rate final. So again, we have to go into that field, that template, and make that change. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to make your life really easy. It'll just make it easier, because you do still have to go in and actually do these changes. You can also do them in Eclipse if you want. There is a way where you can just edit the text file and send it back up. I am one who likes to go into the tool and just make absolutely sure I'm doing it right, because you have a typo or you are out of sync, and I don't want to know what happens. And then here's something that is really cool. So like I said, obviously all of my fields have descriptions and help text. Well, at least this one does. And so this is actually saying, like, we pull in the run rate final field. We'll probably leave this as it is. For that description, but this is the level of detail that you can get into when you are looking at the metadata, because it's all there and it's all available, and you would have to go into each one of these fields and see, have I mentioned this? Or maybe you are describing how a workflow is used now, and that workflow has to change. Well, then you need to change that description as well, so that people don't get confused. Lots of different places. Okay, so my mission for you is to install Eclipse and the Force.com plugin on your computer this week, if not today, because you know that when you go home, you'll never do it. At least that's how I am. And then you want to download 1 or 2 groups of metadata. Think of something really basic. It could be, I want to search all reports for where I am pulling in some field. Or you could get a little more advanced and say, okay, I know that this report actually uses a bucketed field. So why don't I just see what that looks like? One thing I will say is that when you are first downloading your metadata, if you have a lot of reports, we have a very reasonable 2,000 reports for 16 people that are using it. But if you have a lot, it's going to take some time to actually download, and you might get an error. The Java heap error will pop up. So what I have done is the stuff that I know is small, like workflows. Again, not 2,000, a lot, but not 2,000. Page layouts. I'll download all of that stuff first. That's easy. It gives me a lot to work with. And then with the reports, I may just download them all by themselves, or since you can get into the subfolders, the folders that I know have a lot of reports, I'll do those individually. and then I will bring them down into Eclipse. And do that regularly. You are going to want to refresh this information every time you do a search. Otherwise, it's going to be searching on old information. That's probably the biggest thing that I sometimes forget, is just to like go get new information. Sometimes I know that things haven't changed that much, so I get a pretty good idea if I'm just getting a sense of where something is used. Okay. And I hope I've made it clear that Eclipse and the Force.com plugin are worth the effort. I love using them. I love solving problems with it. I've solved some significant problems with it. And then these are places where you can learn more. There isn't an Eclipse trailhead per se, because it's not a Salesforce product. It's a freely available product for doing all sorts of development. But these are some places where you can learn about what you should be looking for, what you should be keeping in mind when you are making a change like that. So, any questions? I talked about some examples. We didn't go into them, but if you're interested in knowing how this can work in other scenarios, happy to go through that too. Yep, if you can just use the mic, that would be great.
A bunch of users that have things tied to them, and so we've been a little bit nervous to deactivate them once they leave the company. Is this a tool for seeing what's tied to those users?
What's tied to the,
like workflows and triggers and...
Oh, well, it depends how you're doing that. I would think if it was workflows, their name or ID might be in the details. If you're like, are you filtering on them, or just saying if it's so-and-so, do this kind of thing?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know. It's an org I inherited, and I was told don't ever deactivate these 3 users.
Oh, wow, okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's 3 licenses, whatever. Yeah, you probably won't find everything, but you'll find a lot, and it just depends how the metadata is displaying that. You might have to know their ID or their name to find everything.
Okay.
So.
Connected apps below the user. Scroll down. Oh, see what's connected to it and start revoking stuff.
That's a good
best. A quick question. So earlier I saw when you were searching for a field in Eclipse, you searched and you used wildcards along the way. Mm-hmm. I like that idea. I was wondering, was there something specific you would find by doing that instead of doing just the API name?
Well, for us, we didn't consistently use the right API name. So like sometimes it ran together. It was run rate final was one word. And then sometimes it was run_rate_final. So it's all the same field, strangely enough, but just different names. So that's why I did it that way. And you might find that in your org too, that things aren't exactly the same from object to object.
Okay, so yeah, it wasn't necessarily referencing that field, but similar. It was related to that concept of that field, I guess.
Yeah. So we had that field on multiple objects. Sometimes we would be just pulling it in from the opportunity somewhere else, and we just named it differently. So, let's see. Yep, go ahead.
So I have a scenario where I've been asked to change the name of a record type. So can you search for, I guess, record types its own field? Can you search for a specific iteration?
Research whether it's being used in like a workflow or something to see.
Right.
Yeah, that's another area where I think you would want to both search on the name and maybe search on the ID of the record type, which is a little tricky to find, but you can find it. And then I think you would probably find if it's being used in that way.
Do you always make your changes in Eclipse, or and how do you decide if you're going to put something into production versus putting it into your sandbox? Do you ever push it into your sandbox and then push it into production? Can you talk about
Sandboxes sound so cool. I really, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, you could definitely make the changes directly in Eclipse. Sometimes I do for like the bulk. If I'm just moving a file from one place to the other, like moving reports, I could do that in Eclipse. Right now, we just feel more comfortable getting the list of changes and then starting to look at what they are and making those changes manually. But as far as what do I decide to push into production, stuff that I'm really sure isn't going to break anything. But yeah, I think as long as you back up the file that you're editing, the metadata file that you're editing, so that if you push it live and something breaks, you can just put it right back. I think that's fine. But yeah, obviously sandbox first, of course. And once you know that that's working correctly, it should match your production. The metadata should match for the most part. So I would feel comfortable doing that live, yeah. So, yep.
So you've mentioned making changes in Eclipse as well. Can you recommend a resource where we can go and find out about how to make changes and push them into production?
Yeah, there's actually a really great hands-on training from a few years ago that is intended for developers, but at the very beginning, it goes through a lot of the stuff that you would want to know. It goes through what does it mean when you refresh? What does it mean when you deploy? What does it mean when you synchronize? So I don't have the URL, but I can put it in. I know there's some kind of feed for the session, so I can put it in there too. Yeah, it's really good, and it answered a lot of my questions, for sure. So, okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your morning.